Today's Friday. October the 13th, I believe. We have an important message here that we need to look at and try to figure out what's going on. The Russian government pertaining to Putin has already spoke up and said that the Western world has made a severe mistake, and because what we're fixing to witness and see, according to Putin, is the American people's fault. And I'm sure whenever he's talking about the American people, he's talking about a few people that was engaged in a movement, a conspiracy that thought that they was going to be able to overpower, undermine God himself and God's chosen people, pertaining to trying to stifle, stop, hinder biblical Bible prophecy from occurring. I personally have pity on these people, of those that actually was convinced that what I was telling them was bogus. Now it's come time to pay the piper. I don't know for sure the extent of what we're fixing to see in the next few days, in the next few weeks, in the next few years. But according to the way that I interpret the Bible, it will not be good for humanity.
It is the top of the hour. Welcome back to Morning Joe. It is Friday, October 13th. Jonathan Lemire, Mike Barnacle, and Richard Haas are still with us, and joining the conversation we have New York Times opinion columnist David French and former NBC News Tel Aviv bureau chief Martin Fletcher joins us this morning. Willie?
All right, we begin this hour, Mika, with the latest out of the war between Israel and Hamas. Earlier today, Israel's military called on civilians in Gaza to evacuate the northern part of the country and to head to the southern part of the territory. For more, let's go live to NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez. He's in the southern city of Ashdod, Israel, this morning. So, Raf, tell us more about this order from the Israeli military, this warning to evacuate effectively the entire northern half of Gaza into the southern half in a 24-hour period.
Willie, this is an evacuation order completely unprecedented in scope, unprecedented in scale, and it appears to point to an unprecedented Israeli military operation being planned. There are more than 1 million civilians who live in the northern half of Gaza, and Israel is telling them the entire area is full of Hamas military targets. It's going to be targeted, and people, for their own safety, need to leave the area. But the United Nations this morning is pleading with Israel to back down on this evacuation order, saying there is simply no way to move 1 million people without catastrophic humanitarian consequences. There is no way to house them. There is no way to feed them. As you know, Willie, Gaza is sealed in. Both the Egyptian and the Israeli borders are closed. There is nowhere for these people to run. Israel's military says it has no choice. It has to go into Gaza. It has to dismantle the Hamas war machine, and it has to make sure that what happened on Saturday never happens again. Now, senior members of President Biden's cabinet are fanned out across the region right now. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is here in Israel. He's just meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. As you know, Willie, the Secretary of Defense was a general before he was in the cabinet. He was in charge of the war against ISIS in Syria and in northern Iraq. He said today in Jerusalem he knows a thing or two about ISIS, and what he has seen out of southern Israel, these atrocities committed by Hamas, are worse than anything that ISIS has done. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who was here in Israel yesterday, is now over the border in Jordan. He's meeting with the King of Jordan, a close U.S. ally, who is warning the United States today that if there is large-scale displacement of Palestinians in Gaza, there is the potential for a regional crisis, a crisis that spreads far beyond the borders of the Holy Land. Willie, on top of all of this, all eyes waiting for news of the hostages inside of Gaza. Hamas today says 13 of those hostages have been killed by Israeli airstrikes inside the Gaza Strip. We should be really clear, the Israeli military is not commenting on that claim by Hamas. NBC News has not verified it, but there is deep, deep concern among the families of hostages that this intense bombing campaign, followed by what is potentially going to be a ground invasion of Gaza on a scale unlike anything we've ever seen before, could lead to the deaths of the hostages, either if they are executed at the hands of their Hamas captors or if they're killed accidentally by advancing Israeli forces. Willie?
And of course, that was precisely the strategy from Hamas, taking 150 hostages so that they could use them as human shields should Israel go in. You mentioned the threat of a wider war coming from Jordan. Let's be specific about what they mean by that and what many people fear could happen with this Israeli assault over the next 24 hours, potentially through the weekend, going in on the ground. What is the threat? That Hezbollah might attack from the north, that other nations might get involved?
Yeah, so there's a number of different possibilities here, Willie. We are hearing from the Israeli military that they have evacuated one civilian community in northern Israel right now on the Gaza border because of concerns about possible infiltration by militants, terrorists from Lebanon. We don't have any details on that. There have been a number of false alarms over the last couple of days, but there has also been rocket fire from Hezbollah, from smaller Palestinian armed groups inside of Lebanon. At this precise moment, there is no indication that Hezbollah, which is a far, far more powerful organization than Hamas, is planning to engage in a full-scale war with Israel, but it's one of the concerns. Specifically, what the King of Jordan is talking about is one, a flow of refugees that could be absolutely destabilizing, both in neighboring Egypt, but also in the West Bank, which borders Jordan. Jordan knows a thing or two about flows of refugees, having taken many, many millions of Syrians over the course of the war. But the King of Jordan's other point is that these images coming from Gaza are potentially so inflammatory that they may arouse passions all across the region, spark violence, and we could end up in a cycle that nobody can control. Willie?
And Raph, of course, the reason this response from Israel is and will be so ferocious is because of the absolutely horrifying scenes that we've all seen now, the acts of savagery by Hamas in some of those kibbutzes, and you were one of the handful of international correspondents to witness with your own eyes. Can you share with our viewers what you saw, what you heard, what you witnessed there in Israel?
Yeah, Willie, our team has had the grim distinction of going to two of these kibbutzim that were overrun by Hamas terrorists in the early hours of Saturday morning, as well as the site of that music festival where 260 people, most of them young, were slaughtered in a field. This was a place of music, it was a place of dancing, it was a place of joy, and when we walked that festival site yesterday, there was just a deathly, deathly silence. You could see all the signs of what had been a normal weekend cut just brutally short. There were bloody shoes on the ground that had fallen off the feet of people who were fleeing for their lives. There were ransacked suitcases where the Hamas gunmen had paused their murderous rampage to see if there was anything worth stealing from the suitcases of the people that they were killing. In these kibbutzim, we went to two, Kfar Aza and Be'eri. The horror is so unbelievably concentrated. These are not big places. The homes are not physically large. And you step through what are often blown out doorways, and inside the walls are covered in blood. They are riddled with bullets. In Kfar Aza, a community of 700 people, it felt like Israeli forces were finding new bodies of civilians almost every couple of minutes. They told us a number of children were either shot or burned to death inside of these kibbutzim. And ironically, Willie, it's still, if you look in the right way, it's a beautiful place down there. It's very green, it's rural, it's pleasant. We were looking in front of what was the kind of kindergarten, the local school in this kibbutz. It looks nice, except for the body of a Hamas fighter, which is decomposing in the hot sun in front of the doorway. So these are communities that are never going to be the same again. Some of them have lost a very, very significant proportion of their residents. And these are places that are scarred forever, and this is a country that is scarred forever. Will it?
It is so sad that certain individuals here in the Western world, in America, thought that they was going to be able to escape this by causing so much distress and harm and hurt into the messenger's life that was putting out the very message of trying to warn the people ahead of time of the very occurrences that is fixing to unfold. So in ways, actually in lots of ways, whenever the president of Russia speaks up and says that this is the Western world's fault, in lots of ways he is absolutely pegging it right on the head. The sad thing about what's happening and what has happened is that it was a few individuals that was involved that embarked up into this conspiracy, beginning with the presidency of Ronald Reagan, that went down through various channels, through Homeland Security, Secret Service, various local officials, judges, lawyers, townsmen, mayors, governors, that now it's fixing to go full circle. In other words, the unescapable is fixing to occur from all indication. And whenever it does, it could actually be Third World War in the makings. So many people that was against prophecy occurring took their emotions and their feelings out on me personally. And for them just to pick on me is one thing, but then whenever they go to picking on my whole family because of this, especially my younger brother David, to the point that David could no longer withstand the pressures that was falling up into his brother's life as well as his own. Here in Northwest Tennessee, it basically brought a sudden death to a man that should not have died. That should not have died. This is the reason why that I point my finger directly at various local, state officials of dereliction of duty, because they sat idly by and was entertained by the activity that was going on 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, along with 430 Beech Grove Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm still being isolated. I'm still being degraded. I'm still being dehumanized by the church communities and the authorities in this area that has yet to right the wrongs that it has committed. So be it as it may, let the record show that the individual that's talking in behind the mic right now and behind the recording has dedicated well over 30 years of his life in trying to warn people and give out advisories that obviously certain people did not approve of. I mean, whenever you start a radio station on a WENK AM radio station, and within the third or fourth week of putting out your message, you was basically ambushed to the degree that either I got off the radio stations immediately or seek employment elsewhere. It's pretty obvious that certain individuals in Northwest Tennessee did not want this to occur. And they felt like that if they could have put a cap on it, if they could have enclosed it, if they could have stopped it some way or another, that it was basically going to stop prophecy from coming true. And there's no doubt, like Ronalisa Rice was on TV yesterday. I listened to her quite a bit. She has been a great advocate for trying to bring forth peace over into that area, along with other Heinz 57, Kerry. He's been another advocate. Even Donald Trump, whenever he was president, pertaining to the Arab Abraham Accords. There has been lots of attempts throughout the years of settling things down, and in lots of ways it probably has, okay? But at the same time, while it was settling down, it was also allowing for the enemies to build, to think, to plot, to plan, and to basically go through with what has already been prophesied that's going to go through, pertaining to the war of all wars that it looks like to me that is in the beginning phases of. That's the reason why the United Nations is saying what they're saying today. Other officials is saying what they're saying today towards stop. But at the same time, we know that if they was to have been attacked, including America, we would be doing the exact same thing that the Holy Land is fixing to embark upon. So if there's ever been a time that we needed to pray for one another and quit all this silliness that's been going on now that has led not just America but the world in general off into a deep dark hole, if there's ever been a time that we needed to pray for one another, and especially pray for the Christians and pray for the Holy Land, it is now. It is now. No ifs, ands, buts about it. Because what they're talking about is basically an explosion of kind of like a wildfire explosion, to where if something on this magnitude breaks out, the next thing you know, there'll be something else that'll break out. Next thing you know, there'll be another group that'll break out that'll just feed evil of basically sticking out its head and showing just exactly how evil the evil can actually be. You know, people over here in the Western world, that they feel that they have went through some sort of uncomfortableness pertaining to COVID, in which a lot of them has. A lot of them has lost loved ones, friends, sisters, brothers, mothers, fathers, etc. And it has brought a great deal of displeasantness in a great deal of people's lives here in America. But you keep in mind that these countries all over the world was already struggling way before COVID ever hit. And they don't have a supply emergency line like the American politicians built for the Americans pertaining to stimulus checks, of giving everybody out money to help to soften the load. So inevitably, these countries that was already struggling before COVID are now at their wits' end to some degree, because their citizens has suffered so tremendously. Whenever you have a group of people that have recently went through so much unbearableness, you have people that are now willing to do whatever that it takes in their eyes to survive. And we have went over that threshold, that pivoting point, to the degree that now we're seeing other countries lashing out at their own members, or lashing out at their neighbors, or their competition all over the world, that's only festering. It's growing. It's just like a wildfire. It's getting bigger. And as it gets bigger, it will continue to get bigger. It's just like a cancer. Once it starts, it's almost next to impossible to put it out in a normal frame of mind. We have Northwest Tennessee and various Washington, D.C. prior politicians that has put us in these positions. I cannot speak any clearer. I cannot talk any more vivid than what I am right now, that I have been putting out multiple messages for now 30 plus years to prepare, to prepare, to prepare. Get ready, get ready, get ready. And my message was either ignored or it was attacked in trying to stop the messenger with the message. People have stereotyped me to the degree that I still meet people on the roads. It's not as bad as what it was, but I still meet people on the roads today that still gives me a bird, a finger, or will deliberately walk around aisle 4 because I'm on the backside of aisle 4, or I'll hear them whispering different remarks about me in the background that I have absolutely no earthly idea towards who these people are, what they stand for, what they've done, or what they haven't done. In other words, they know all about my life. They know all about Juby. And Juby hasn't done not one thing to these people. But because the seeds of hate, bitterness, and rejection was planted right here in Northwest Tennessee, beginning in Kenton, Tennessee, 40 plus years ago, has now festered in what it is festered into. And the only thing that I can say, may God have mercy upon these people that originally started this rejection or this movement 30 plus years ago. May God have mercy on them, because as far as I'm concerned, whatever happens to these individuals, regardless whether they just be a common old Joe, regardless whether they be a preacher, a teacher, somebody up the political line, a lawyer, whoever, may God have mercy on their souls, because I guarantee you these people will give an account for allowing for this world to get in the shape that it's in. And now we're fixing to see the aftermath of those actions. Going back into the Reagan era. And we're not talking about a few politicians. We're talking about basically a few thousand, as well as media pertaining to your news and your corporate church world, that once more put forth such of a strong effort in trying to stop the very thing that we're now fixing to witness, that they have failed in their attempts. Just like the people here in Northwest Tennessee in Weakley County. Whenever I come back here, I had no earthly idea that something had already been festering before I ever come back, because I'd been gone for about 10 years or longer, probably more like 20. So I really didn't know what was being said, how it was being said, what was being plotted, who was doing the plotting. And then all of a sudden, whenever I come back here, total, absolute hell breaks loose in my brother and our lives. Had no idea that it was going to be a pile-on. If I know that it was going to be a pile-on and it was going to basically cost me my only remaining sibling, pertaining to how the community was going to respond and react, I never would have come back here. I would have stayed in North Carolina or East Tennessee or Florida or a number of states that I had been to previous before. But I thought that I could come back and help these people. Plus, whenever you're caught in between a hard place and a rock and you've done already spent your money on putting out your message, it ain't like that I had something to fall back on pertaining to a retirement home or some sort of a safe haven. So I felt like, I felt like that God had led me back into this area. And to think, by putting up signs such as St. Augustine Recovery Center, based around the 3 H's, and to think that my brother and I invested in signs and also in monuments of recognizing our American men and women in uniform and our first responders, to think that that was already in motion before I ever come back here, and to see how things blowed up right in front of our face, that Johnson, Tommy Thomas, Tommy Moore, and yes, prior Mike Wilson, Sheriff Mike Wilson, going all the way back to the mayor of Kenton, Tennessee, Damian Cross, all these people, if they haven't yet stood in front of God and being judged, they soon will be. That is a promise. Along with the Neal family, and I could go down a long list of the families over in Kenton, Tennessee, and an extremely long list here at the Beech Ridge, Hop-In, Cydonia, Weakley County region in Martin, Tennessee, and Dresden, Tennessee, and the surrounding areas. I could go down a very long list of people, families that live either in this community or the surrounding area around this community. But I'll let them and God deal with that, because I am not their judge. It's not for me to condemn these people in the way that I'm talking about them being condemned. And basically they have condemned themselves in playing games with God, extraordinarily beginning with the Assembly of God people in Cydonia that basically brushed this off like it was some sort of a game, or the church in Greenfield, Tennessee that I was going to that basically banded me, and churches in Milan, Tennessee, and Jackson, Tennessee, and Humboldt, and Trenton, and I could go on and on and on about the surrounding people that was dead set that they was not going to accept this. They wasn't going to accept this message coming from the messenger. And they was coming up with every kind of idea that you could think of in trying to brush it off towards it being a hoax. And now, because of their actions, has put us all where we are today in seeing destructionable issues happening not only to the people in the Middle East, but also the people here in America and the people all over the world. You don't think that these people are going to give an account for these things? You don't think of all the souls that has wound up going to hell because they wasn't given the proper warnings, or they wasn't given the proper advice pertaining to advisories? You don't think that these people are going to be held accountable for those things? Good luck. That's all I got to say. May God have mercy on your souls.
Willie.
As you say, a grim assignment indeed, but such a critically important one, and we so appreciate your reporting. NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez inside of Israel for us today. Again, Raf, thanks so much. Joe, these descriptions, and there have been some people who've downplayed perhaps what's happened, but our reporters have seen with their own eyes. I mean, he just said that babies were burned. Did you ever think you'd hear that in your life?
No.
And it explains why the Israeli people and the world are outraged by this and why the response is going to be so overwhelming from Israel.
It is. And if that had happened in the United States, bordering any country, we would have been in the next day.
What did I just say?
Absolutely no doubt that Israel is left with no choice but to degrade Hamas. And it's going to be an extraordinarily difficult challenge. But you're right, the imagery that shows the absolute savagery. Babies burned alive, babies, infants riddled with bullet holes in their chest, elderly women burned to death, women raped, killed, paraded around like dead animals. No, this would not stand for a day in the United States of America. This would not stand for a day in just about every other country in the globe. I've just got to say, people sipping their latte in the comfort of their Starbucks somewhere, making moral statements about Israel and Israel's right to exist. They need to look at those images, and they need to stop lying to themselves.
People like Kerry and Condoleezza Rice and all these other spokesmen and diplomats have created a false sense of peace. A false peace. Why? Because they did not go in the right direction. They was trying to do something, first of all, upon their own. Secondly, they was trying to do something that was just the backwards way of doing it, towards trying to clean the cup from the outside versus cleaning the cup from the inside. And it's just so many compromising events that could have been eliminated that now has been brought up onto not only the guilty but the innocent too as well. And it really it speaks volumes about what type of people that was engaged in these affairs that even to this day has yet to come forth in trying to clean up and trying to right the wrongs that's been committed. I can only imagine how that they are so grief-stricken that their actions did not prevail pertaining to them trying to destroy the messenger. They are probably so furious right now because their attempts didn't work in destroying the very human being that's talking to you right now. They're probably absolutely furious, and they have so much bitterness and hate within their heart because they did not succeed. The same way that other evil demonic men and women have tried again and again and again towards stopping God's plan for man, and they didn't succeed neither. Has it been rough? It's been the roughest thing that I think that one individual could ever begin to imagine. And plus the uncomfortableness going. I mean, I don't even have friends to rely upon in this area. Maybe one or two people that I can rely upon, and I'm so grateful and thankful that I even have those. But this has affected relationships. This has affected my relationship with my son. This has affected relationships with family members. This has affected the way that people look at me and stereotype me. This has affected so many areas in my life that one of the most smartest psychiatric doctors in the world could not begin to touch on all the factors of how many areas in my life that this has affected, from financial to physical to spiritual to emotional. I could go on and on and on. But one thing that I can go on about is that I'm still alive. I can still talk. I'm still making my little homegrown videos, recording news agencies throughout the world, and I can still tell my story regardless whether even if no one believes my story. And I continue to keep telling people again and again and again that I can prove that I got actual paperwork either from the doctor's offices or from various officials either in Tennessee, Kentucky, or over in Oklahoma that I can prove. Matter of fact, in some cases, you can actually just Google my name, Dennis James Juby Jackson, spell the name Juby, Jubby, and it'll pop up of some of the events that I have been engaged in or encountered into in trying to tell my story. And it's really sad that a man had to go all the way out west to make a name for himself because the people in Northwest Tennessee was so dead set that they was going to sit idly by and let not just an individual's life be destroyed, but the prophecies of God be destroyed. You don't think that these people are going to give an account for these things? I don't care if they're a judge. I don't care if they're a senator, a congressman, a governor. I don't care if they're a mayor, a homemade mayor like over in Kenton, Tennessee, Damian Cross or Randy Brundridge or whatever official. You will give an account for what has occurred. In the meantime, now my body is wearing out. I'm 62 plus years old. Because various government officials has poisoned me with Risperdal, it has brought obesity into my life as well as diabetes. And now that basically the only thing that I can do is the things that I'm doing right now, which is telling my story. And I'm sure that so many people are just furious of the fact that I am letting the genie out of the bottle. Furious. And the people that they should be furious towards are themselves. Not Juby. Juby was victimized. Juby was victimized by the system. I got accused again and again and again by different things, and one of them that brings to my mind, other than I was trying to usher in the millennium, which was false because I don't have nothing to do with this. I was chosen by God in this. But one of the things that comes to my mind is that I was accused of challenging the system. Well, why are you challenging the system? You're challenging the system, Juby. Well, according to the Constitution that I've read, and according to our laws, I was supposed to have the right to get out here and preach and warn people about end time events and giving out advisories. I don't see nobody attacking other news agencies that tries to warn people ahead of time of impending doom pertaining to the weather or in other factors that may be going on. But yet, no, they attacked me. They attacked me on a level similar of Jimmy Swaggart, but in reality, they attacked me even deeper and more sinister because it went on again and again and again and again and again in my life to where Jimmy Swaggart's ordeal happened, and then boom, bam, he recovered from that. And as far as I know, Jimmy Swaggart's ministry to this day is still raking in all kinds of money and is still helping people all over the world pertaining to the Jimmy Swaggart's ministry. That's not what happened in my life. I got attacked again and again and again, beginning at the top and working its way down to the bottom. And after the event happened in my personal life, after 12/12/12, and I was up here in Cadiz, Kentucky, and the following year in 2013, I go back out to Oklahoma, and I try to go back to work for the individuals that thought enough of me that they said, "Yeah, DJ, come on back, Juby. You was a good worker. You made us money. Come on back." Collision Clinic. And once I identified what was going on in Oklahoma, I realized that it wasn't just going to be Oklahoma, but putting all the dots together towards what had happened to me in other areas, regardless whether it was Missouri, where Sam Walton started his adventures, or out in San Diego, California, out towards Stockton, California, or in a little town called Basalt, Colorado, right outside of Aspen, Colorado, or other areas like in Knoxville, Tennessee, or in Atlanta, Tennessee, in Atlanta, Georgia. I could go on and on and on about these close encounters that I've had with people that have read up about my story, and they basically stereotyped me in thinking that I was some sort of a could be, would be bin Laden that began right here in Weakley County in Martin, Tennessee in 2005. I have said this again, and I will continue to say this because it is the truth. They went from a tactic in Northwest Tennessee towards trying to prove to humanity that the individual that's talking to you right now was crazier than a you know what in a you know what. That's what their desires was. They wanted to prove to humanity and brand me towards me being insane. Insane. And just as of yesterday, while I was in a Verizon store in Dresden, Tennessee, I explained to the individual that was telling me about all these gizmos and gadgets of killing the bees and everything else that he sees to be very, very frightening of, because he's a very knowledgeable person. And I explained to him that, yeah, we're living in an era right now that, as far as I'm concerned, the whole country has turned into an insane asylum. Maybe not everybody, but per se, looking at the masses of the occurrences that's happening today in 2023, going back just within my lifespan of me being 62 years old, it has turned into a insane asylum. And I've heard this again on TV pertaining to our jails, and our jails is basically mental institutions, but the only problem is you don't have professional people that's treating those people while they're in jails, and that's affecting other people that's not necessarily mentally crazy, but because they're having to be around all these people that does have this disease, now it weakens and diminishes their character too as well. So it's like the bad apple theory. One bad apple spoils a whole bunch. Once you get something in motion, and that's exactly what's occurring right now, it balloons, it dominoes, it accelerates, kind of like cancer. You're okay as long as you never have cancer. And they claim to some degree that we all have a dormant cell within our body somewhere that is dormant that could produce or start to produce cancer. Once that cancer ever begins, then it's going to spread into other areas of the body, and the next thing you know, you're ate up with cancer and you're fixing to die because of cancer. Kind of like the frog in the water theory. As long as the water's gently warming up a little at a time, the frog don't notice it, does he? But now if you was to throw that frog off into a pot of water that's boiling, he would immediately jump out because he would notice it right away. Oh my God, it's hot, it's going to kill me. But if you do it gradually, and you hear me talk a lot of times about the small fox, the little fox are the ones that you have to be careful about. It's the smaller foxes that can get in and out of the vineyard that can chew a little here and chew a little there. And don't nobody notice that these small foxes are working, but it's the small foxes that can get in these narrow places, in these really tight confined areas. And before long, they have killed the whole vineyard. That's what's happened to us. A little at a time. And now we're fixing to witness something that is going to go beyond probably most people's worst nightmares, that began right here in Northwest Tennessee in 1983 after a telephone call was given to the White House about the Antichrist.
And stop lying about Hamas, because the terror that we saw from ISIS, we would see over weeks at a time. all of this happened in a matter of hours. And it's unspeakable evils, just unspeakable evils. Martin Fletcher, I got to say, I remember when I visited the Holocaust, I thought the Holocaust would give me, when I visited Auschwitz, I thought Auschwitz would give me a better understanding of what happened, of how humanity could lead to the extermination of 6 million Jews. And I must say, I walked away from Auschwitz even more baffled. I wasn't looking at the victims and the pictures. I was looking at the German soldiers standing there asking how they could do that to another human being. And I say that just to say, you were so much closer to this story than any of us. You have spent so much time there. And I would guess all the time you spent there, it probably gives you no more insight into the events of Saturday and what's happening now, because there really isn't a parallel, is there, Martin?
There is a parallel in a way. I mean, part of my family were killed in Auschwitz, as a matter of fact, and so this is extremely personal, and I think it's partly accounts for the extraordinary rising of anger and sense of futility and sense of vulnerability in Israel today. You know,
And that's one reason why that I was getting on to various preachers here in this area that kept wanting to blame everything on God. Well, it's God's fault. God's the one that's doing this. God's the one that's bringing these hurricanes. God's the one that's bringing these tornadoes. God's the one that's causing all these droughts. Talk about a mixed up bunch of people. I guarantee you, if God gets ready to do something, there will be no question at hand that he done it. Because he's got the power within his own abilities to swipe not only the planet Earth, but the whole universe, every star, every galaxy, the Milky Way, everything, completely out of order. And our little finite minds can't accept that. We just can't accept the fact that there is a higher power above and beyond reason that at any given moment could destroy us all. But what we're actually seeing with all the hurricanes, with all the stuff that we have basically brought upon to ourselves in playing games by diminishing all the resources out of the ground and now bringing all the poisonous gases up into the atmosphere, and between the two, what we're seeing is the world basically bringing ravaging experiences to various continents. And of course, you know, you got to keep in mind that there's a lot of times there's people out there in the ocean that goes through hellacious events, or people up in the air that goes through hellacious events pertaining to aviation. But by and large, we are being ravaged again and again and again, either with too much rain, not enough rain, too much flooding, not enough rain, winds, high winds, weather, the forces of nature just being completely off the charts in comparison to what we consider normal. And of course, this individual, what he's talking about is based upon his perspective. He's got more of a personal perspective about what went on during the Jewish Holocaust days. And my perspective of it is, whenever I was just a young lad going through all them pictures at school and seeing all them people that was basically half dressed and starving to death to the point that you could see every bone in their freaking body. Those pictures was self-explanatory towards what kind of gruesome hell that those poor people was going through towards wanting to desecrate the Jew. And even to this day, we have seen just within the past 48 to 72 hours, since all this has erupted, people standing up and blaming the Jews for what has occurred and what is occurring. It shows you how depraved, it shows you how deceived, it shows you how bamboozled that various people truly are in not recognizing the differences between evil and good, the forces of evil versus the forces of good. And like I said, whenever I was just a young child, looking at the concentration camps, the gas concentration camps, and people walking around starving to death and just in so much misery. You didn't have to have too much of an imagination to realize that those people was going through hell. And at any given moment, whenever they was going through what they was going through, that death was actually a welcomed occurrence in their lives. You go for starvation for days and days and days. You have abscess, tooth decay. You have this going on in your body. You have that going on in your body, and nobody is assisting you. You wake up in the morning and rats is actually chewing on your feet or on your body. There's bugs. It's just an infestation of goriness that you have to live around. Plus, you got to listen to the suffering of others that's going through the same thing. You're in an environment of a death camp. And the only thing that I can compare that even comes close to it, that I have personally had to witness, was various homeless shelters throughout the countryside. Atlanta was probably the second to the worst. No, I'm going to say Miami. Miami was probably the second to the worst. Atlanta was the third to the worst. And the first to the worst was New Mexico. Not Santa Fe, New Mexico, but Albuquerque, New Mexico. You go to some of those homeless centers, and it's just like going to a death camp. You got people that's literally coughing up their lungs. You got people that's bleeding in their ears. You got people that's screaming because they're in so much misery and pain. And now that has come near a neighborhood near us, just as the Walmart slogan that now are seducing our cities and our communities. You don't think, once more, that certain people that has allowed for this to get in this kind of shape are going to be held accountable? You know, they can pray all they want, and good luck to them. I really do, because I'm not going to be their condemner. I'm not going to be their executioner. I'm not going to be their judge. I'm not going to be the one that basically brings condemnation into their own lives pertaining to either what they done or what they didn't do that they should have done. These are all going to be events that's going to be brought upon to themselves because they did not do what they should have done, or they done what they shouldn't have done, or they sat idly by while they watched endless people, not just myself, but all kinds of suffering happening to people all over the world. And the proof is in the pudding pertaining to the anti-Semitism by seeing what has occurred just within the past 3 or 4 days. And it's not just happening here in America. It's happening all over the planet. All over the planet, you have protest marches right now that are against the Jews. The hell with the Jews. Gas the Jews is what they're saying. Whenever you have a society that is turning their back on a righteous God, or blaming everything that should be blamed upon the devil, blaming upon God, you have a world, my friends, that is on its way out. Just like the world before the great flood. I noticed yesterday on the news, kind of getting off the subject just a little bit, but I noticed yesterday on the news they had a double rainbow that basically spanned over Fort Collins. I think it was Fort Collins, or maybe Denver, Colorado. It was somewhere out in Colorado. That was one of the most beautifulest sights that I had seen in a while, because I had seen double rainbows before, and most people never has the opportunity of seeing a double rainbow. But this double rainbow was so precise in its accuracy between one side and the other, being, by looking at it, it looked just absolutely within a millimeter or two of being the same as far as the distance between the two. And the colors was so vibrant, was so real in looking at that and knowing that only God could have created not just one rainbow that represents the promise that he gave to Noah, But to put two in the air simultaneously to where it looked like a professional had done it, in which it was a professional that done it, which was God, brought back memories as I was watching this news article of this double rainbow of, God's confirming and reconfirming that I have promised you that the world would not be destroyed the next time by water, but the next time it gets destroyed because of the wickedness of humanity would be by fire and brimstone. And to think that as I have watched just within the past probably 6 or 8, maybe 12 months, since I basically put the message out regarding the planet warming up from the inside out, of seeing so many either ground volcanoes or underground volcanoes, to witness this on Facebook and to recognize, oh my God, this is really and truly happening. With all the water warming up, that's basically melting the icebergs, and science, aviation can say whatever they want to. Various people can say whatever they want to about the ice, given the impression on the outside that we can visually see from satellites, that in places looks as if the ice has actually increased. But what you're not seeing is the iceberg that goes down into the water, sometimes a mile, 2 miles, or 3 miles deep, that's steadily melting. We know this because we see the oceans rising. It's nothing uncommon now for certain coastal lining areas just in America, not counting all over the world. But it's nothing uncommon to see these things as they are inundating communities, especially coastlining communities that are making people's lives miserable. But yet, no, you'll have people get on TV and say, oh, no, you can look at the ice right there. Oh, there's a massive amount. It's cubic inches or cubic feet or cubic miles. It's extending even further than what it was last year or the year before. Well, that may be true of what we're seeing on the outside with the human eye pertaining to satellites. But what's going on below that ice that we can't see, that's the part that's affecting our planet. Just like all the underground volcanoes, the Ring of Fire, all the other events that's happening all over the world that are undeniable. But we still have climate deniers. We still have global deniers that's still denying the facts, just like we're still having people denying about the election that Donald Trump said was stolen, even though Donald Trump himself knows that the election was not stolen. His own family members know that the election had not been stolen. It's just so much of a chaotic event that's happening again and again and again. And you turn on the news and you wonder, okay, what's going to top what happened yesterday? Or you turn on the news yesterday, what's going to top what happened the day before yesterday? And it just keeps ballooning. It just keeps getting bigger. It just keeps expanding. Just like I was talking about pertaining to cancer. Once it starts, it's almost next to impossible to stop. Or a wildfire. Snowballing, dominoes affecting.
You mentioned Auschwitz. This is it's the key phrase in Israelis, in the memory of Israelis. When these Hamas murderers went into Israel, they killed around 1,000 Israelis in horrific ways in one day. But when they went into Israel to kill Israelis, they weren't looking for Israelis to kill. They were looking for Jews to kill. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, absolutely significant. I've been in Gaza at least 50 to 70 times over the years, over the decades, many times because there was some kind of outbreak of fighting or the crowds were rushing toward the border. And in every single instance, when they called out, the Israelis are coming, they never used the word Israelis, not once. They used the word Jesh, which is army, or they used the word Yehud, the Jews. The Jews are coming. They're killing the Jews. And I think that's something we have to understand. When the Hamas today calling for days of rage and anger across the world in support of Hamas, they're talking about the Jews. They're talking about go find the Jews. So this is not only about Israel. It goes even deeper than that. It goes and it hits the Israelis and the Jews deep in their psyche. Vulnerability going back, well, generations, thousands of years. This is an extension of that.
Thousands of years.
Yeah.
Thousands of years. And of course, Martin, what I was saying is that there was no parallel. I meant in all the years of your reporting, there was no parallel. That you would, not even 73, you would have to go back to the Holocaust. And I want to underline something else. I'll tell you what, I'm going to tweet it out right now. There's an Atlantic article by Bruce Hoffman, Understanding Hamas's Genocidal Ideology. As we sit here and see people on American college campuses and college campuses across the West wringing their hands about Hamas and conflating Hamas with the plight of the suffering Palestinian people.
It's the same type of events that my brother and I went through for 3 consecutive years that costed him his life. The pressures coming from various people in this community that was hate-mongering us, that was tormenting our lives, that was bringing such terror into our lives that my brother David could not bear it. And the only thing that stopped it from occurring, in which it still is occurring in some aspects, because I occasionally will have people come out here and be very respectful. I'll have people come out here that want to take a picture with their automobile, looking at the Dragon Memorial site out here at 291 Thompson Road. But then again, I also have people come out here that'll be still just as disrespectful, that'll throw out beer cans or beer bottles. I'll still have people come out here that will spin their tires towards showing her you-know-what. It slowed down a little bit, but it didn't stop it. But what did slow it down, the amount that it slowed down, was whenever God intervened after my brother died and various people started dropping like flies around here. They either started having severe medical problems, or they was running into trees or bridge railings, or they was overdosing, or they was blowing up their houses because they was making meth or some other kind of drugs. So once they got the ideal, leave 291, post 291 alone, they finally backed off. But it wasn't the judges, it wasn't the prosecuting attorneys, it wasn't the people working for the state of Tennessee for the benefit of the people that stopped it. It was God that stopped it. It was God that stopped it. Because then they realized that this guy that's been proclaiming this message now for over 30 plus years is not bogus. He's really sincere in what he's saying and talking about. And now we're seeing the manifestations of other things occurring all over the planet, including COVID, that helps to verify just exactly what I've been telling the people all along, which is to prepare, being the watchman on the wall, being assigned an assignment from God himself to tell the people to prepare, just like Noah. Noah was assigned an assignment. Tell the people, I'm going to destroy them. To prepare. What did they do to the other prophets of God? They dismissed them as them being fraudulent. They dismissed them as them being this way or that way. And it changed in my life in 2005 with a group of people that wanted to characterize me as being basically somebody that needed to be institutionalized, somebody that was loco in the head. It changed. Their whole dynamics changed here in Martin, Tennessee, and Weakley County whenever they went from no longer wanting to classify me as being somebody that was mentally ill, but now let's try to classify Mr. Jackson towards him being a danger to humanity, and let's put him in the same category as we would put somebody like Bin Laden or Timothy McVeigh. Let's put Mr. Jackson in that same category.
With any.
In other words, if we can't brand him and stain him one way, we'll brand him and stain him in another. And in the meantime, I'm watching not just my community, but my nation falling apart. Like I told the individual yesterday in the Verizon Center up here in Dresden. As far as I'm concerned, the whole thing here in America has turned into a psychiatric ward. Just some of the most craziest things that are happening today that I never would have even began to imagine that would occur back whenever I was growing up in the 60s and the 70s. Yeah, there was a few cases. You know, we had Ted Bundy and the killers, and we had people putting poison in Tylenol. We had people that was putting poison in trick or treat candy and razor blades in fruit. We had some very, very cruel people back then, but it wasn't spread abroad like it is today. Today, it is spread abroad, and you liable to be actually living right beside a psychomaniac that would actually love to be able to get their chainsaw out and cut somebody up into little bitty pieces and actually be proud of what that they had done, thinking that what that they had done, that they was doing it for a good cause. Well, doesn't the Bible verify that? It does. It says that their minds will become wax cold, their hearts will become hatefulness, and they will actually do acts upon to the Christian society in thinking that they're doing God a favor. They're twisted. They're upside down. They have been bamboozled. And I'm just not talking about somebody that's been on meth or somebody that was born with their parents being on meth. I'm talking about good, stern, absolutely strong-minded men and women that knows the Bible, that have been blaming God for all this rather than blaming the devil. Just like I had a discussion with Randy Brundridge before he wound up the movement of kicking me out of Central Baptist Church after me being a member out there for almost a year, talking about the devil. He said, well, I just see the devil as a metaphor. Well, it's strange to me that you see the devil as a metaphor whenever they wound up passing a law that now state and federal workers had to now abide by marrying heterosexual people, just like, gays and lesbians and LGBTQ community people that live that way, the same as they do heterosexuals. And Randy Brundridge immediately spoke up and said, I refuse to marry anybody. In other words, I'm not going to do none of it. That way he don't get accused of being prejudiced. Well, what does that tell you about him? Tells me that he knew that God is real and the devil is real. That's what it tells me about him, because he has a conscience that he has to live with, and because he knows, or he felt like that he knew, I support this theory myself, in marrying gays and LGBTQ community, lesbians and gays. I think that it is not a holy matrimony marriage. I think it's a marriage, but I don't think it's a holy matrimony marriage. There is a difference. You can get married to whoever you want to get married to, but that doesn't mean it's a holy matrimony marriage, pertaining to it having the blessings of the Lord God Almighty being in that relationship.
With any Jew is considered a death sentence if you're in Gaza because of Hamas's founding documents. Anybody that wants peace wants Hamas degraded and out of power in Gaza.
Well, David French is writing about exactly this challenge in a piece for the New York Times. And David, it's entitled, of course, What It Would Mean to Treat Hamas Like...
We're going to go ahead and fast forward this real quick because I got some things I got to do. I mean, these are all very interesting events that's happening right now. Don't get me wrong. And I wish that I could spend more time, but I have a doctor's appointment. I have a doctor's appointment, and I can't sit here and speak as clearly and as longly as I'd like to, because I have other priorities that I have to deal with today. Plus, I got an operation that's coming up that I'm having to prepare various things for, including my own livelihood out here where I live, that obviously nobody cares about. And because of it, it's bringing that much more of a strain into my life that I cannot waste as much time
Now,
right
carrier
now
as
what I would like to be able to talk to people about. And to me, it's not wasting time. To me, it's being very fruitful in the message that the Heavenly Father has given unto me to give to others. But as long as they continue to plug up their ears, or as long as they're
principle of
continue being rubberneckers and not wanting to listen to the things that the anointed people are telling people about, well, then basically I'm just talking to the wind. I just was be out here preaching to the tree somewhere. But I'm going to fast forward this real quick till it gets to a quick commercial. It's been going now several minutes now, 40 minutes without a commercial on MSNBC. It must be doing some sort of a special this morning on this, because usually there's always, okay, we got a commercial. Now we're going to go back here. Now I can go do what I need to do.
Beyond what anyone would ever want to imagine, much less actually see and, God forbid, experience. A baby, an infant, riddled with bullets. Soldiers beheaded. Young people burned alive in their cars or in their hideaway rooms. I could go on, but it's simply depravity in the worst imaginable way.
Meanwhile, in its ongoing response to the terrorist ambush and ahead of a potential ground invasion of Gaza, Israel's military has called for the entire population of the northern half of Gaza to move to southern Gaza within the next 24 hours. That area, home to just over 1 million people, accounts for about half of the territory's population. The United Nations warning such a move would be impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. The UN has asked for the order to be rescinded to avoid transforming, quote, what is already a tragedy into a calamitous situation. Hamas has told Palestinians not to comply with Israeli demands, calling it, quote, psychological warfare. Join us now from the Israel-Gaza border, NBC Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel. Richard, thank you for being with us again this morning. What more can you tell us about the practicality of what Israel has requested, which is that the northern half of Gaza move to the southern half of Gaza in the next 24 hours?
And it is asking people to do that while they are under attack, while they are sealed off, and while the power, electricity, gas, all supplies have been cut off. So people are, it is not an organized evacuation in any way. People have just been told, leave by any means possible. You can see behind me right now, that is the northern Gaza Strip. That is Gaza City. That is the most populated part of Gaza. As you said, there are just over 2 million people in the Gaza Strip. It is broken up into roughly two heavily populated areas. The north with Gaza City, and then in the south. And what Israel has done, Han Yunis in the south, and what Israel has said, everyone should leave the north, evacuate Gaza City, evacuate an entire city of 1 million people, and get in their cars, get in donkey carts, and there are still donkey carts in use in Gaza, and move south, moved below the Wadi Gaza Valley. And we've spoken this morning with people inside Gaza. They are trying to do it. Hamas has told them not to leave, not to obey this order, but people are listening, and they are packing whatever they can, taking a little food, taking some supplies. If they have any batteries, any gasoline, they're taking that with them, and they are trying to move south. Overnight, we heard some of the most intense bombardments so far. We were here all night, and the incoming was intense, one after the other, after another, with Israeli airstrikes, tank fire going in. We heard small arms fire, and even now we are hearing Israeli drones above, and this offensive is continuing. We will see today if, now that Israel has given this order for people to move south, if the attacks do lessen to a degree. That remains unknown. Hospital officials inside Gaza also tell us they're overwhelmed. There are thousands of dead and injured, and they are running out of supplies. People are being treated on the floor. Hospitals are enormously crowded. So now, under attack, cut off, people are taking what they can and trying to get out of that city right now and move to what could be a safer area before what is anticipated to be an Israeli onslaught into Gaza. And now it seems quite clear that the onslaught will focus on the north, on Gaza City.
So, Richard, let me ask you about that anticipated onslaught. As you said, Israel has been responding from the air to this point over the last week or so. What could a ground assault, a ground invasion by the Israeli military look like here?
Well, one of the reasons that Israel says that it wants people to leave is it is expecting a massive fight. It is expecting that Hamas is dug in. So when you expect to fight against an entrenched enemy, you are going to bring a lot of force to bear. So Israel has brought in tanks, it has brought in artillery, and when they move the tanks into the tight streets of Gaza, looking for Hamas, concerned about booby traps, trying to destroy them, they will be firing a great deal. So this area could soon become an open fire zone, and I think that's why Israel is trying to tell people leave the area right now. It will be dangerous for the Israelis because Hamas is dug in. It will be dangerous for Hamas, clearly, but it will be very dangerous for any Palestinians who stay behind and are caught up in what will soon be perhaps some of the most intense urban fighting that we've seen anywhere in the world in years.
And Richard Engel, thank you so much, and please do everything you can to be safe. Richard Haas will ask you that same question. Egypt, obviously, no friends of Hamas. Egypt, who of course struck a peace deal with Israel in the late 1970s. Talk about why Egypt has sealed off the border with Hamas, because that obviously would allow a lot of Palestinians to escape.
Egypt used to administer the Gaza Strip and did until the 1967 Six-Day War. They know it all too well. There's been infiltration over the years into Egypt of people who are committing terrorist acts within Egypt, among other things. So they just shut down the border as part of their larger effort to maintain internal security. It's about that simple.
And that really explains a larger point that Americans who are just now tuning into this, the atrocities that have happened and hearing about Israel and Hamas, and of course the ongoing Palestinian question. I had noticed over the past 10, 15 years, I'm sure you've noticed it even longer because you've been so involved in this region for so long, but a growing animosity toward the Palestinian cause because of Hamas, because of the Palestinian Authority, from Arab governments. It used to be that the Arab League would get together, they would unanimously vote against Israel, they would vote for causes that were near and dear to Hamas's heart. That is no more. That's no longer. In fact, most of the Sunni Arab world has turned against Hamas and by extension by those Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip, which of course is an ongoing tragedy. Why?
Lots of reasons. One is the principal backer of Hamas is Iran. That immediately puts a lot of the Sunni Arab government, shall we say, on notice. People forget their history also, Joe. When Saddam Hussein invaded and occupied Kuwait, who was cheering for Saddam Hussein? Well, it was the Palestinians. A lot of the Sunni Arab governments have a pretty long memory. They have no illusions about that. Hamas, again, their whole involvement with terrorism and other radical groups doesn't make them the Arab governments comfortable. Arab governments would rather normalize with Israel for the most part. The one thing that the Arab governments, though, Joe, have to be careful of, and we see it in some ways in the toing and froing with Saudi policy here, is the Palestinians still enjoy considerable popular support. In some ways, the governments are in a different place in lots of the Arab world than the quote-unquote Arab street. So the governments have to be a little bit careful not to get too far out in front of their population. And if you have, for example, Al Jazeera, showing all sorts of images. If we get to the point where Israel does go in and force, and you see Palestinian civilians getting hurt, it's just the sort of thing that's going to make the governments really careful, because they face a situation then where sympathy for Hamas and sympathy for the Palestinians will grow.
Well, there's already, of course, a humanitarian crisis that is growing right now in Gaza. Those images are coming out of children, of elderly people in being hurt by the attacks. Many have died. Richard, the question is, because obviously Hamas knew this would happen. Hamas, just being blunt about it, if an Israeli dies, then that's a victory for Hamas. If a Palestinian dies while Israel is trying to go after Hamas terrorists, that's also seen as a victory for Hamas. They don't care if their people die. In fact, they've said anybody that tries to make peace with Israel will be shot. So the question is, Richard, with the United Nations warning of a coming humanitarian crisis that many would say is already there, what do the Israelis do? What is their best move? They cannot allow Gaza to remain run by these terrorists who have run it without an election since 2007. They have to go in and they have to root out, I was going to say ISIS, might as well be ISIS, Hamas. But how do they do it and avoid just a catastrophic humanitarian crisis?
So let me be controversial here. There's a difference between what Israel will do or likely to do and what it should do. What I fear it will do is go in mass. I think it'll be extraordinarily costly for Israeli armed forces. Several will get killed, will get captured. I think it increases the odds dramatically if there's a massive Israel.
In a situation like that, you're automatically provoked, number one. Number two, David and I couldn't afford to take the law into our own hands in handling the situation out here that obviously the judges and the attorneys and the prosecuting attorneys wasn't willing to handle for themselves. They just let it fester, hoping that there would be blood on the floor. And they was hoping that the blood would be our blood. Well, it turned out to be our blood pertaining to my brother's blood. Yeah, he died, and on account of all this. But because the laws are so screwed up in America, we couldn't afford to cross that line, and we knew that. And basically, all we could do was hunker down and become somebody's whipping post out here at 291 Thompson Road. There's nowhere in the Bible that it says God's people are supposed to be whored out to be somebody's whipping post. And whenever people like Tommy Moore looks at me and says, well, Juby, doesn't the Bible said, blessed are ye who are persecuted for righteous sake? It tells me that you're the one that's hoping that I'll be persecuted. Rather than you defending our causes out here, you're actually against them. We're talking about brainwashed attorneys and judges. We're talking about brainwashed people that are supposed to be our professional people that are hired to protect us. This is their line of thinking. I do not blame Israel for retaliating against what has occurred. This is war, and that's another thing that the American strategies, as well as the United Nations, has brought up into the world. They think that everybody that's pissed off is going to live by the Geneva Agreement after World War II. I got news for you. There's evil demonic people out there that could care less about the Geneva Convention. I agree that we're supposed to handle things in a political format pertaining to it being either politically correct or impolitically correct pertaining to wars. But whenever you're talking about a world that has become dysfunctional, and you're talking about people that are now struggling to survive, do you think they're going to give a damn about any kind of Geneva Convention? Do you think that the Russian government and Putin gives a damn about any Geneva Convention whenever they're over there bombing innocent men, women, and children and trying to genocide the Ukrainians? No, they don't. You need to throw that out the door. This is the 21st century. We're dealing with a completely different model, a completely different group of people today. Like I've said, they went about this in the wrong way, just like the Afghanistan war, going to conform the Afghanistanians over there and going in with all their ideology and going in with all their techniques. And a lot of that stuff was really, really good. That's kind of like Alcohol Anonymous. Alcohol Anonymous and Drug Anonymous programs are really, really good. They really are. But whenever you get to looking at the facts, over 2/3 of their endeavors are in vain. You know why? Because they didn't go about it in the right way. They didn't start to clean the cup from the inside versus trying to clean it from the outside. Yeah, there's a few people that succeed, and I'm glad that they do, towards getting them off of drugs or getting them off of alcohol. But by and large, it is a failed system. And the reason why is because it is not spiritually motivated the way that it's supposed to be. Oh, yeah, you can call the Heavenly Father a higher power. You can call Jesus Christ a higher power. Oh, it's a higher power, a higher power, a higher power. Well, we know that both entities are a higher power, regardless whether it's the entity of good or the entity of evil. We are just in the fleshly bodies. We can't compete with the spirit world. And if you're thinking that you can, you're already deceived anyways. Probably ain't much hope for you to begin with, because you're thinking that you can wish-wash or manipulate and put the blame on one versus the other, knowing good and well that it wasn't God's fault, it was the devil's fault. It was our fault. It was we the people's fault that didn't stand up against the oil typhoons that has now brought these horrible, horrible environmental events into our lives.
Of Israeli campaign in Gaza, the war will widen. That's just the sort of thing I fear could bring Hezbollah and others into the war. You will get the global international response against Israel, so Israel will lose some of the high ground. Most of all, Joe, I do not believe it will succeed if success is defined as eliminating Hamas. I fear it could actually work the other way. I also think Israel has better options. I would suggest two things. I would say go after Hamas in a discreet way, not in a mass way. Do targeted attacks, whether it's from the air or from the ground, when you have really high value, quote unquote, actionable intelligence. Go after Hamas. Second of all, shore up Israeli defenses facing Gaza. That was what started this, in the sense, or allowed this to happen. The weakness of...
Was it your granddaughters that got mutilated? Was it your grandchildren that got burnt in fires or shot in the head? Was any of these people that you're talking about that's supposed to abide by your rules and regulations? Did any of your people go through the horrors that they've just went through in the past 6 days? Probably not. So it's kind of like coaching a football game on Monday morning. Boy, we can all be after game coaches and saying what that guy either should have done or shouldn't have done, and we can stonewall him, and we can bring all kinds of false accusations about the individual that we felt like should have caught the ball or didn't catch the ball. But the bottom line is this: unless you're the guy out there actually playing the game, dealing with the surrounding elements and the surrounding circumstances, you really don't have a clue in what was going on. Now, you may think you know what's going on, and in ways, maybe you do know what's going on. But as far as you actually being there and having to deal with what they was dealing with during the time that they was trying to catch the ball, it's a guessing game. It's a guessing game. Your Monday morning quarterbacks is nothing more than people that wants to voice their opinion about how they feel. Well, good. That's fine. But that's not where the rubber meets the road now, is it? The rubber meets the road of the people that's gone through what they've just went through. And it's their right to make their decisions in what they're going to do with this. Now, whether or not it festers into something major or it don't fester into something major, basically they're caught in between the middle of damned if they do and damned if they don't. They have been provoked into this next phase, and because of it, they've got to choose between the lesser of the two evils. Are they going to choose to sit down and basically become somebody's whipping post, like David and I was out here, because we didn't have good law enforcement that was willing to protect us and stand in our corners, even though we was being violated again and again and again? Are they going to take things up into their own hands? And you know what? If they take things up into their own hands, I don't blame them one bit, because if that was to have happened, I say this, if that was to have happened to the American citizens, what we would have done, or if that would have happened to some other country, what they would have done, we would have been doing the same thing. I say that, but then again, I don't know, because I've seen 9/11 and I've seen how we responded and reacted to 9/11, pertaining to not shutting down our borders. Once more, a confused people that don't know how to respond to accurate assessments. Just like this guy here, making his assessment. Oh, if I was Jerusalem, if I was Israel, if I was this, if I was that, blah, 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 blah. Well, if I was a daggum frog that had wings, I wouldn't have to worry about bumping my tail every time I took a jump. You can wish in one hand and poo-poo in the other and see which one fills up the quickest with your psychological, professional analysm, acquainted suggestions.
Defense readiness against Gaza. So make it impossible for Hamas ever to do something like this ever again, and go after individual or units of Hamas whenever you have a chance. But I would really be careful. I really have.
They have been dealing with the same thing and using the same tactics again and again and again throughout the years. You've seen now what it has gotten them. It has gotten them the same type of actions. It's just like somebody that's basically mentally retarded, or somebody that's out of touch with reality, that they claim if you continue to keep doing the same thing again and again and again, and you thinking that you're going to get different results, it is a sign of what? Insanity. It is a sign of insanity, and that is the very thing that has engulfed our various politicians over here, like Condoleezza Rice, our John Kerry, the Heinz 57 man. It's the very same thing that has inundated these people's minds that really don't have a clue in what the hell is going on. Now, I'm voicing my opinion now, so you can take it for what it's worth. You can either take it with a grain of salt, or you can say, you know what, I agree with that guy. I agree with what that man's talking about right there.
Have questions about reoccupation of Gaza. We've seen this movie before. Israel got out in 2005 for the very reason that this could not be sustained. And when they got out, it created a vacuum, which Hamas has filled. I don't want to see a rerun here.
And of course, Willie, Hamas knew that with its barbaric.
And I don't want to get out in 100-degree temperatures and mow my yard, but that doesn't mean I'm going to take a John Deere tractor with a disc and a breaking plow and plow it all under, because I don't like to mow my yard in 100-degree temperatures. That's another area that America has been mischaracterized in. Well, I don't like that. Well, who cares what you like? I don't like to get out in 100-degree temperatures and mow my yard, but I still got to do it if my yard's going to get mowed. Either that, or I can get a John Deere tractor out here, or a Massey Ferguson, or an International, or a Case, or a Ford, and break it all under. And wait till the next year and do it all over again whenever it gets hot again. And then wait till the next year and do it all over again whenever it gets hot again. It's insanity. A lot of these tactics are insanity tactics, and that's the very thing that has gotten us where we are today.
Barbaric actions that it would pull Israel in to Gaza, almost setting a trap. Richard put a lot of options out.
They're already in a trap.
The option I would start with is turning the screws on Iran and Iran's oil revenue as tightly as possible, because all of Hamas's funding at the end of the day, are most of it, like Hezbollah's, like the Houthi rebels, like Islamic Jihad, it comes from Iran. When Iran doesn't have oil money, then they can't fund Hamas.
Yeah, and we're hearing now that call from Republicans and Democrats alike about the $6 billion that we've been discussing and everything else. You have to turn the screws. Richard, I wanted to ask you, as we're talking about the relationship between Arab governments and Hamas, about a name we haven't talked about much in the last week or so, and that's Qatar, which hosts in lavish living quarters the leadership of Hamas. They're not on the ground in Gaza. They're in Hamas calling for international jihad this weekend. What is the role of Qatar in all this? Might they be able to help get some of the hostages out? You even have some former foreign policy officials in America saying America should take, or Israel should take, military action to take out the leadership of Hamas inside Qatar. That seems unlikely, but the point is, the people running the operation sit comfortably in a different Arab nation that's been welcomed into the world, hosted the World Cup last year and everything else. So what's their role in all this?
They are the principal financial backers. If Iran is in some ways the principal strategic backer, I guess you'd call it, Qatar hides behind the idea that they're only giving humanitarian help to the people of Gaza. Obviously, money is fungible, so that doesn't wash, doesn't bear any scrutiny. I think the United States should. Put much more pressure on Qatar. Look, after 9/11. U.S. policy changed, and we declared that we no longer drew a distinction between terrorists and those governments that supported terrorism. So I actually think we ought to have a very rough conversation with Qatar. What's holding us back in part is the United States is so dependent on them for its own military presence in this part of the world. It's an important home to a lot of U.S. military forces. So it's not an easy conversation. But and then what we might want to do is talk about the parameters, or put certain limits on the help they give to Hamas. But you also say one other thing. I do think if there is an exchange of hostages for Hamas prisoners being held in Israeli prisons, Qatar will be at the center of it, possibly Egypt as well, but certainly Qatar will play a significant role here. So we've got multiple considerations here. So it's just very hard to say, well, we're going to come down on Qatar with it like a ton of bricks, because there's other things that weigh against that.
So, Jonathan Lemire, President Biden positioning this country fully partnered side by side with Israel. Lots of strength and moral clarity in his words. Secretary Blinken backing him up with his presence there. But he also is running a government that has some parallels with Israel right now in terms of the chaos in the Republican Party and no Speaker of the House.
Yeah, no Speaker of the House, which we'll dive into later this morning. Steve Scalise dropping out last night. And certainly President Biden is a full-throated endorsement of Israel, but also some warnings about what could come next. Like, try to avoid civilian casualties, be concerned about this humanitarian crisis. And we heard it pretty explicitly from Secretary of State Blinken while he was in Israel this week, telling Prime Minister Netanyahu to, hey, tap the brakes a little bit here as to what's going to happen next in Gaza. Richard, also want to talk to you about the fate of the hostages. I have some new reporting this morning looking into why the White House is not sending boots on the ground there, in part in deference to Israel, but also because they don't know where the hostages are. They suspect they're spread out. They suspect they're hidden among civilian targets. They also feel like Israel's intelligence in that region not as good as it used to be, which is why it led to the attack last week. So if Israel goes in this weekend, like they're telegraphing they may, what do you think happens to the 100-odd hostages are there, including some Americans?
Well, obviously, they're in greater jeopardy than they are. Hamas took the hostages for two reasons.
Once again, they're caught in the middle between a hard place and a rock. Most military strategists will tell you that it's time to make a decision of the lesser of the two evils, which usually is based around the needs of the many always outweigh the needs of the few. That's the way that I was raised in believing, pertaining to what went on during World War II. Whenever you start taking the fundamentals away from those decisions, and now you start doing other things, now you're compromising with the enemy. You cannot compromise with the enemy. I did hear yesterday where the check got stopped with $6 billion to Iran. I did hear where that event stopped. I don't know how true it is. I hadn't heard nothing else about it today. But I'm just thinking, you do not defeat evil by compromising with evil. You defeat evil with good, even if good has to use the same tactics as evil, just like the leader of the NRA has said again and again and again. The only way to defeat a bad person with a gun is with a good person with a gun. And whenever you start taking things out of perspective in that order, then you are basically a lunatic. You're insane. And that's what's gotten Jerusalem, Israel, in the trouble that it's in right now, is because it has compromised again and again and again. And once more, you cannot compromise with evil. My brother and I know without a shadow of a doubt, if our father was living and those type of abusivenesses, violations was happening again and again on this property, that probably it wouldn't have just been one or two people that got injured or even killed. It would have probably been family members, or if it would have been somebody like a cartel leader out here, or if it would have been somebody else that was associated with some sort of a group, some sort of a gang. They wouldn't have tolerated this going on as long as what it did while my brother and I was being brutally attacked. Because the laws are so screwed up in America, we had no other choice than to sit there and be whored out. Basically become the community whipping post. Because of various government leaders, judges, attorneys, prosecuting attorneys, prosecutors that would not do their jobs pertaining to dereliction of duty. That's the facts that I continue to keep harping on, and I'm going to continue to keep harping on unless I see some sort of different results coming from various community leaders and authority officials. If not, I pretty well said and done and recorded what I need to record this morning, as this thing is even getting more and more intense. I just pray for the people in this particular situation, but I pray for the needy, the lonely, the sick. I pray for the elderly. I pray for the abused. I pray for those who are being taken advantage of. I pray for those who are being neglected. I pray for each and every country every day that God's will be done and that he will intervene in seeing the meek truly inherit the earth. Because as of right now, instead of the meek inheriting the earth, we've had imposters that acted like that they was the meek that wanted to inherit the earth. We've had imposters. That's what's got not only America in trouble, but all these other countries in trouble. Good luck to all of us. God bless our troops. God bless America. God bless our endeavors. And where we go from this moment on, we want to say a special, special prayer for the situation with all these horrendous acts that's being committed, regardless whether it's being committed upon the Ukrainians or committed upon people down in Africa or people in Mexico and South America or people that were witnessing and have witnessed over in the Middle East in the Holy Land. God bless America, and good luck to all of us. Shalom.